teenagers are really fun, and you don't have to change their diapers, and you can have a conversation with them. And they can be independent, so you don't need to be constantly, supervising stuff. So it gives you a lot more freedom.
Well, welcome back to the Family Care Learning Podcast. I'm James, the producer, and today we have a very special guest. I've been working with her for about 5 years with the CSR program. It is Lisa Marks, and Lisa works with DCS, and she is a program coordinator, I think, for CSR. Is that correct? I'm
a program development specialist, which is a little ambiguous.
I call you Lisa, so
that's fine.
So yeah, today we're going to talk all about some of the permanency and adoption with older teens, and kind of the whole process, and some commonly asked questions that people give us, or things that we've seen a lot in the field. First of all, introduce yourselves to our audience, and we'll get started.
Sure. So I'm Lisa Marks. I work for the Department of Child Safety as a program development specialist, and I kind of do a bunch of different things related to adoption. So I work with the child-specific recruitment program and the contractors, and review those child-specific recruitment plans, help doing trainings on child-specific recruitment, staffings on child-specific recruitment to help, think outside the box, things like that. Yeah. And then I also do family finding statewide for case managers who submit referrals to find family members for kids in foster care.
Mm-hmm. So if you guys didn't know, CSR is child-specific recruitment. We throw around acronyms all the time here. So it's kind of like a specialized program that DCS runs, and agencies like us, like Christian Family Care, we basically try to find permanency for older kids. Maybe is it like 13 and up or 10 and up I've had?
There's no age limit or restriction for child-specific recruitment. It's just DCS has explored every other option possible for permanency for these children, and it hasn't worked out. So we've done family finding. Mm-hmm. We've looked at the adoption registry, and there were no families that could meet the child's needs. And it might not even be because the child's needs. It could be because this sibling set is too large and there's no families on the registry. Right. So that's kind of the criteria for child-specific recruitment. Mm-hmm.
And so when you're doing like family finding, what does that look like? You're kind of like the spy. I'm like, yeah, she's like an investigator. Like if you need to know someone, like Lisa's your girl. So you can pretty much you can pull up records, and what we can do is kind of, knock each person off the list down. It could be neighbors.
Yeah.
It could be anybody, right?
Yeah, and not just, it doesn't even need to necessarily be blood relatives. I can help out with finding old sports coaches, former teachers, maybe people that the child went to church with growing up, any connections that the child has had.
And that's why that's what we call permanency. There's adoption in foster care, but maybe for some of the kids who've been in our system a long time, sometimes we're just looking for permanency, and that could be different things. That could be adoption. But what else could that mean for a kid?
So permanency is not just like a legal term. Mm-hmm. There's also relational permanency. So when most people think about permanency, we're thinking about family reunification, adoption, guardianship, because those are all the legal courses that we can take. But in terms of relational permanency, that's something that every child and teenager deserves and needs. So someone who is going to be there to provide you unconditional love and care no matter what. So someone you can spend time with, on your birthday, or to call when you're having a bad day, or to help you fill out your first job application, or, if you're in trouble, someone who you're going to call.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was telling people, I think I was telling my mom this. I was like, when I'm not feeling good, I text my mom. I call my mom.
Yeah.
That's a typical thing, not a normal thing. But a lot of these kids, they don't have anybody. Yeah. And that's why they, often we see a lot of homelessness outside when they age out of the system, or, so just building that system, we call it, building the people around them. And I think that's, just important. That could be even helping them get through school or college or some program. Maybe it could be like a mentor, maybe.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess, bringing that back, is that like your biggest passion is finding permanency, or like, what's like your big, like, your big passionate thing with DCS?
I do love permanency and
Yeah.
thinking outside the box for our older kids and teenagers, but I love family finding. That's something I'm super passionate about, and giving children the opportunity to be connected with their family,
Yeah.
because
That's the ultimate goal.
well, yeah, and
Yeah.
it's our placement preferences is for kids to be with their family, and their family can offer something that an adoptive family might not ever be able to
Yeah.
offer, and it gives these kids a sense of belonging and so many other things, and it's really healthy for them to have those connections with their family members. So, I have a lot of neat stories where kids have been separated from their family for a long period of time, and they thought that their family just like didn't care about them.
No one existed.
Yeah. And then lo and behold, like the parents kind of separated from the rest of their family because they weren't on good terms with them. And so there were family members that really cared about these kids, but didn't know what was going on because the parents completely took them out of the child's life. So
Yeah. I mean, I've had grandparents who, they say, "Oh, my daughter, they took them out of our lives. We didn't know where they were." Yeah. And like, they're just crying on the phone. Like, "We're so happy that you called," because, our version of the story was they just disappeared and they're a missing person. And we called the police. No one could do anything about it. And so, and maybe we'll even pair them with the grandparents. Maybe it doesn't work out, but that they're still in their life. Even if it doesn't work out as a placement, there's still a permanent connection. And so I always tell grandparents, like, or family members, like, even like, you don't have to give everything. You can just give, a weekend, a month, like, it doesn't have to be like they feel like they have to bear this huge burden. I'm like, how about we just take it a step at a time and, work with their team, maybe, check out a CFT, like a meeting, so it could really look at a lot of different ways. So that kind of brings me to like, what is the biggest need right now with CSR, with older kids in foster care?
I mean, we really need foster families and adoptive families to care for older kids and be open to that. And not only older kids, but siblings as well. We really need families who are open to taking siblings and keeping kids together. Right. That's really important.
That's probably the hardest part. When I was in the program, we had to make decision meetings, TDMs, and maybe one sibling has a lot more needs than the other, and we can't find a family to take everyone. And so, having to split them up or temporarily split them up, like that was...
It's devastating.
Yeah, it's another loss. And we never preferred that, but sometimes it has to happen to even find one kid a home. Yeah. And so, finding a home, or finding families that could take sibling groups, I would probably say, that's super important. Can you just give me like a little overview, I guess, of, maybe this is a big question, but DCS, there's different departments. And so does it always happen where you go, like, I think it's investigations is the start of it. And then you go into adoption, right?
Well, then there's ongoing.
Oh, ongoing. Okay.
So investigators, they respond to the reports that come in through the hotline, and they make the safety decision whether or not a child is safe. And if they're determined not to be safe and a dependency has to be filed, then they transfer that case to ongoing. But if they find, the child's safe, then they close the case and it doesn't move any further. But if kids do have to be removed and a dependency is filed, then it transfers to an ongoing unit. The ongoing unit will manage the case throughout the dependency while it's open, while the rights are still intact for the parents. And
that's the big one, parental rights.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and if the parents are not able to make the behavioral changes necessary to reunify with their children, then those cases usually go to severance and adoption.
Right.
And if the parental rights are terminated, then the case moves to an adoption unit.
Right. And some of our kids were in adoptions, and some of them were in permanency, in a permanency unit. So were the permanency kids maybe in the system longer, or maybe had special needs, or?
So the adoption unit, the kids that transferred to that unit usually had adoptive placements already established.
Okay.
A lot of the cases that go over to the permanency planning unit is kids who are legally free but don't have a placement yet identified. Or sometimes they don't even have to be legally free, but they've been in the system for so long with no parental involvement. Right. So, you know, they're not legally free for adoption, but there's really no movement going on in the case. So there's still a focus on permanency.
Yeah, that's kind of like where we came in is, okay, let's try to reopen this. Let's reinvigorate this case. Mm-hmm. Let's, check every corner. Because maybe the kid has been through a lot and they're also picky. It's not just finding families. It's also, what does this kid actually want? Mm-hmm. So that kind of brings me to like, what are some reasons why older kids might not want to be adopted or might not want to be in a permanent home or, things like that. Like what are some, I guess choices that kids could make that might also slow things down or make them fearful of the whole process?
So kids over 12 in Arizona, they have to consent to an adoption. Mm-hmm. So, older kids have a lot of fear about, do I have to change my name? Does this mean that I'm not a part of my first family anymore? Like a lot of loyalty conflicts. Right. And what a lot of people don't realize is just because you're adopted, that doesn't mean that your biological family is not your family anymore. Right. Just because one family is your legal family doesn't mean that your biological family is not a part of your life or can't be a part of your life. We have kids that are adopted by non-family members, but we still have biological grandma who's involved and, spends time with the kid and stuff. Yeah. But there's a lot of, internal conflicts for these kids and a lot of disappointment that they're trying to avoid. So especially for kids who've had prior disruptions or are used to people disappointing them over and over again, whether it be their team or their foster parents or, anybody. It's who wants to go through more disappointment? And so the idea of something permanent not really being permanent, it's hard to...
Like, what does that even mean anymore? If you've been in a few adoptive homes, but they never happened, well, then adoption might just mean disappointment, letdown, heartbreak. One thing, like I guess we were talking about this earlier, is it doesn't always, if you have a biological child and they're doing a bad behavior, you never even think about disruption. Mm-hmm. It's, but these kids have to think about that. Like, oh my gosh, I failed at this one thing and this is a possibility. I could be homeless again. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so there's a huge fear. It's better just to maybe reject families before they reject you.
Yeah. It's a lot easier to push people away than to have them push you away first. So.
Yeah. And we perceive that often as like a problematic or behavioral child when maybe they're learned behaviors. Maybe this is like a survival thing. They're just surviving. Yeah. And it's not personal. They just can't make attachments like an average person might be able to. So I think about that a lot too, is like, meet them where they're at. Maybe this is where they're at and that's okay. Maybe you could foster them and maybe one day they will change their mind,
But every child usually craves that relationship.
Oh yeah.
Even if it can't be legal permanency, like every child needs and deserves a permanent person in their life. So
even if they can't reciprocate that back to you, like often now I talk to families, they're like, they don't show the affection back. And I'm like, well, maybe they can't. Maybe they don't even know what that means.
Yeah. And so actually one of an exercise that I think that I learned about from a therapist that I was like, wow, that's such a great idea, is doing a love language test with your kiddos and yourself to see how you show love and how you like to receive love. Because some kids don't like being hugged. And they like getting gifts. Like kids are very materialistic. So they might perceive you giving them a Lego set as a form of care. You might not think anything of it. Right. But that's how a child might interpret it. Right. Versus, I mean, they might be avoiding hugs, but it doesn't mean that, you know.
Right. Or if you know their history, maybe they've had bad touch.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like maybe they have issues with the men in their past, so they might only attach to the women. And, you know, being understanding of that is like, that's huge. And I've also had families try to like buy affection. It can kind of go the other way, but typically it's just understanding, you know, where do they come from and what does that mean? You know, permanency. So I guess tell me, how does the whole meeting and selection and the whole adoption process work?
So for the match meeting process.
The match meeting process.
So the way kids get to the match meeting process, there are a few things that like need to happen first before it gets to that part in a case.
Yeah.
The match meeting usually happens when a case is headed towards severance and there's no identified adoptive home for the child. So maybe the foster parents just aren't adopting, or the kids have been in a group home. And so before we can start with the match process, we have to do a family find search. So it's called a Seneca Search, where we have to explore all family members and ensure that every family member has been reached out to regarding this child.
Right.
If we don't have any family members that are able to care for the child or the children, then we move forward with the match process. So the match specialist will look at the certified adoptive families on the Central Adoption Registry and see what families can meet the child's needs. So
it's kind of like a Match.com thing almost. I always joke.
We are matching them together.
Matchmaking.
We shared child information forms regarding the children with the family first. That's kind of like the first step. And those forms kind of detail the child's history, their needs, behaviorally, medically, educationally, their traditions, their culture, things like that.
Right.
Their birth history. And then if the family wants to proceed, they complete a family response form, and that kind of details how the family can best meet the child's needs. And then we move forward to the match meeting. So licensing workers will present their families and why they think their family can best meet the child or children's needs.
And we all kind of sit around and we're like trying to pick them apart, and it's kind of like a Bachelor situation. We're like, come on now, you better... You know, don't just, you know, we really try to vet families.
Well, yeah, and there's so many...
Yeah. It's not like we're just trying to like, oh, you're the first family, let's go.
No, I mean, this is supposed to be a lifetime permanent thing. Like we once a child moves into an adoptive home, like we want them to stay there forever.
Right.
And we want it to be successful. So, I mean, we do as much vetting as possible and ask those hard questions that maybe families haven't thought about previously. So like if we have a few families at the match meeting, after the licensing workers have presented their families, usually the licensing workers will step out of the meeting. And then the team will discuss, and the child's team, it's usually the case manager, the guardian ad litem, or the social worker for the guardian ad litem, therapist, high needs case manager if it's applicable, current placement.
Maybe a family member. It could be anyone who's really close to them.
Any support to the child who can help make that decision. And so the child's team will kind of discuss, what family they thought can best meet the needs of the child. And we also look at like the support system that the family has, because you need a lot of support going through this. And so that's also something important that we consider. So we usually select a primary family and an alternate family. So if the primary family does not want to move forward, then we'll go with the alternate family. So once we select the primary family, we move forward then to a paper staffing. So at a paper staffing, that's when the adoptive parents come and attend.
Right. Much more personal.
Yeah. So the first one is just with the licensing worker, and then the paper staffing is with the family, and then they can meet the child's whole team, and they can ask the team questions about the child or children.
And usually I've had time by then to actually read the whole entire home study a few times and like highlight things and ask really specific questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's also the opportunity where they're provided with all of the child's important documentation. So their birth records, any psychological evaluations, behavioral health notes, IEPs, 504 plans. The adoptive parents or the prospective adoptive parents would receive the parents' redacted psychological evaluations as well. Anything to help them best make an informed decision about moving forward.
I've even had kids write notes to their future family.
Yeah.
And I'll say, hey, maybe this doesn't have, data, but it just shows their personality more. And so that really seems to help them. And then how long does that normally, we give all that info to them, and how long does that normally take for them to kind of make a decision or?
So we ask that they take at least 24.
At least.
Yeah, because I know some adoptive parents are like set before they even get to the paper staffing.
Right.
But this is a really serious process. It's a lifelong decision. So we want you to take this very seriously and, talk with your family, talk with your support system, really read every single page that we provide to make an informed decision.
And they haven't met the kid yet.
Correct.
So that's normally when I typically would say, well, like, you haven't even met them yet. So we're matching you to someone you haven't actually had time with. So there's no rush in this. They're not going anywhere. Please take your time.
Yeah.
And so then what's the next step after that?
So if the family decides they want to move forward, then a transition plan is developed. So a transition plan is driven by the child and their comfort level. So it starts out with, like, the first visit is usually like a very short, like hour-long visit at the child's placement. If it's a group home, usually we try to do it at like a neutral location, like a park or something. If it's a foster home, we ask that the visit happen at the foster home if the foster family is comfortable. And so the first visit's very short, like an hour long. And then the visits gradually increase in time. So then like a day visit, and then an overnight, and then a weekend. And all the while, even if they're not spending time physically with the child, encouraging the family to call the placement throughout the week, check in, just say, hey, I'm thinking about you. Talk about how their day was and stuff like that. So it's not like, out of sight, out of mind, that,
Right.
This family is still keeping this child in their thoughts throughout the week. And
Yeah, because for a kid, a week could be forever.
yeah.
So I would say, well, did you call them? Like, well, we saw them 2 weeks ago. We had ice cream. It's like, okay, are you being a mentor, or are you let them know that you miss them, or?
Yeah. So like when we're creating a transition plan, it's supposed to be like very intentional with, with the end goal. So increasing time, spending quality time together, not taking the kid shopping and doing all this like fun stuff.
Abnormal stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like it's not like families go shopping all the time and do all these crazy fun things all the time. Like do things that you guys normally do as a family, like have family dinners together, do other family activities together. You
That's
don't
kind of
have
like the Disneyland syndrome. Is like,
Yes,
it's so overwhelming. Every time I go with them, we either go to a concert or to some crazy event. And I'm like, well, have you just hung out with them? And they're like, no, I haven't. I don't even know what the house is like.
Yeah. And the kids, this is, especially if they're, older, they have a say in this. And so they need to have realistic expectations about what it's going to look like for them to be living there, like what their chores are going to look like, what the family does on a typical weekend, what they do for family time, things like that.
Yeah. And then let's say they successfully do all the transitional visits, and then the team will eventually decide an actual move-in date. And then kind of what happens from there.
So the child has to be in the home for a minimum of 6 months before we can proceed with the adoption. And I know to some people that seems like a very, very long time, but adoption is final and it's permanent, and we take that very seriously, and we want it to be successful. Once a child is adopted, we don't want to see that child ever again. And I mean that in
That's
the
the whole
nicest
point.
way. Like, we don't want this kid to re-enter foster care. We want this to be forever. So the reason we have that 6 month long time frame is to ensure that like this is
Right.
going to work out. And if you need anything prior to the adoption, we can help you navigate those
Right.
things that you need. So behavioral health, or if you need help in the educational arena, anything like that, like let's make sure we can help support you before the adoption.
Yeah, DCS and the whole team helps with every aspect of their life. And when you become the legal guardian, when you become the actual, when you've adopted, you're kind of responsible for everything. So we're trying as best as we can to hand the torch to you to make it as successful as possible. And I've actually had parents like say, well, I'm going to talk to my lawyer and expedite the process. And I'm like, well, it's not like an emergency. Like,
Yeah, and the kid's not going anywhere.
Right.
I mean, like, there's really no point in rushing.
They've been in the system 12 years and 6 months. They just slow down.
Yeah, there's no need to rush stuff.
So how can like foster parents, how can they engage with what you're doing with older kids, or how can they maybe start looking into the process of adoption, or, what does that look like if maybe they're just interested in foster care or interested in adoption? How can they start the process?
So you just asked a lot of questions.
That's a lot. I know.
I think I'll start out with, I think a lot of families like to start out with infants and
Right.
littles, and the idea of fostering a teenager is very scary to some people. I just want to, remind everyone that all kids turn into teenagers. They will be teenagers one day. They might be really cute and little now, but they will be teenagers.
Right. And there's a lot less competition, because like I have families who'll say, well, I've been waiting for a kid for 6 months. And I'm like, are you just trying to cherry pick a kid?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, there's plenty of great kids who are 16, 17, and they just maybe like a year or two, and that's okay. And you don't have to wait for maybe 6 months to cherry pick the perfect child.
Yeah. And there's no perfect child. By
There's
the
no
way.
perfect child. But
But just try to be open. I mean, teenagers are really fun, and you don't have to change their diapers, and you can have a conversation with them. And they can be independent, so you don't need to be constantly, supervising stuff. So it gives you a lot more freedom as well. But just being open. So maybe you don't feel comfortable just yet taking placement of a teenager, but what about doing respite? Start doing respite to get familiarity, or sign up to be a mentor for a teenager. Just to like kind of get your feet wet. Or, when we have our Children's Heart Gallery photo shoots, we have certified families or licensed families come who maybe haven't had experience before with teenagers and kind of want to see what it's like, and they can meet some of the children who are there to get their pictures taken for the Children's Heart Gallery. They can be matched with them and be guides at the event, and kind of get to know the kids and see, what they're like, their personality. And teenagers really are not super scary.
It's not like a mythical creature.
Yeah.
And sometimes they haven't been in the system a long time. They just entered the system because of tragic events, and we're just trying to help them as fast as we can to prevent the aging out. And so, sometimes like there's like this belief that it's the hardest thing ever. I'm like, well, not always. Every kid is very unique, and everyone has a different story, and some kids just work better in different families. And so, so try it out, basically, is what you're saying.
Yeah. And there's lots of opportunities out there to give foster parents the opportunity to try it out.
Yeah. Can you share any success stories or generic things that we don't want to give people's like names out, but is there any do you see like a lot of success with this, or
with the child specific so I mean, child specific recruitment, a lot of the kids in the program are more challenging because we've already exhausted match meeting efforts and family finding, but we are still doing family finding on a regular basis throughout the entirety of a case. So even though we tried family finding a year ago, we're still going to continue every year because family circumstances change, or they move and have, might not have had an accurate address before, but now we can.
I would always get that all the time. It's like, well, we tried that already. It's like, well, that was like 2 years ago. People change.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different things that could happen in 2 years. And So you just never know.
Yeah. So like one example, and it kind of ties into family finding, is I was working with a 15-year-old that came into care. So it's like, we already know that this is going to be a challenge because the kid is 15. And he was already a legal orphan. So his mom passed away when he was 4 and his dad passed away when he was 11. When his mom passed away, he went to go live with his dad and his dad's relatives, and they all cut off contact with all of mom's relatives. And once he was 11, the dad passed away as well. So he was bouncing around with all of these paternal relatives, ended up getting in, trouble, and he stole a neighbor's bike and got arrested and went to juvenile detention. And his caregiver at the time was like, I'm not picking him up. So DCS got involved. We didn't have any parents at that point. So we had a TDM, and the child was involved in the TDM. And one wish he had was to find his older sister. So they shared the same mom, different dads. So when their mom passed away, he went with his dad and his sister went with her dad. So they hadn't seen each other in years. So he was 15 at this point. He hadn't seen his sister since she was like 4. So it's been a long time. And I found mom's obituary online.
Only you could do that.
I mean, you have to think outside the box for these kids. I mean, he was detained at juvenile detention and was going to be discharged to a therapeutic foster home because of his needs. So you have to think outside the box for these kids because normal, typical things are probably not going to work. So, so I found mom's obituary online, and I was looking through the guest log because, family members and other people will write things in the guest log. So one of the people that wrote in the guest log was mom's best friend, and she just made mention that, she missed her every day and thinks of her all the time. And this was like in 2005 when the obituary was published. And at the time I found the obituary, it was like 2015 or 16. So I was like, the likelihood that this person has the same email address is so slim to none, but I might as well just give it a whirl. So I reached out to the mom's best friend and was like, I'm working with mom's son. Like he's currently in foster care and we're trying to find his sister. And as like literally the same day I sent that email, I got a flood of phone calls from all of mom's relatives being like, we have been looking for this kid for years. We had no idea what happened to him. Like we would show up at his dad's house and they would call the police on us, like they just didn't want anything to do with us. Like we've been looking on social media to try and find him. We had no idea like where he was, what was going on. And they sent me like all of his baby photos and photos of him and his sister. And at that point, his sister was like 19. She was already in college in California. But I was able to give all of these baby photos to him and letters from all these relatives that he had no clue like existed and he has no memory of these relatives. And for him, knowing that there's a whole side of his family that like he doesn't know, but like have thought about him for all of these years and have tried to find him and like want to be a part of his life was like huge for him.
Yeah.
And so
like that's his story.
Yeah. And he had like no sense of belonging. He didn't really even know where he belonged because none of his dad's family really wanted him. And he was bouncing around to all these relatives that just kind of wanted to wash their hands clean of him. So we found his sister, and his foster mom and I and the sister coordinated like a Skype visit. And it was kind of like a surprise that like we didn't ask him ahead of time. Like he didn't know we had this plan.
Oh.
So I let him know, like, I found your sister and I think she really wants to see you. Do you want to FaceTime or Skype with her? He's like, yeah. So we had her set up on Skype in the other room. And So they turn on their cameras and they both just like stare at each other on the screen. They look exactly the same. Like their glasses are the same colors, same shape, and their facial features look exactly the same. And they just like sat and stared at each other because they had not seen what they looked like in so many years. And just seeing like, oh my gosh, you're this relative that I haven't seen in so long. You're my sister. And, it was like this beautiful moment. And his sister asked him, do you still have your orange peel? And I'm like sitting there like, what is she talking about? And so he's like, yeah, I do. I was like, wait, he knows what she's talking about? And so he starts like digging at the back of his scalp and then puts his head towards the camera. Orange peel.
Orange peel.
And he explained his family he had like a patch on his scalp where he just didn't grow hair. And so his whole family called it his orange peel. But he knew exactly what his sister was talking about and went to go show her his little orange peel in the back of his head. But like, it was just so neat to see them like this shared moment they had after not seeing each other for years and that special bond they still shared. Yeah. And, that's also kind of the importance of family finding and family engagement. But I mean, this kid was in a therapeutic placement and, his sister couldn't care for him because she was in college and living on campus and stuff like that. But her uncle, his uncle as well as biological mom's brother, ended up taking this kid, and his behaviors completely did a 360 when we found these family members and they got engaged. I mean, they, committed to being part of family therapy sessions. They attended all the CFTs and it was just like a perfect situation for this kid. I mean, he really needed that sense of belonging. And he was able to get it. So
yeah, I mean, one small thing can turn into a big thing.
Yeah,
that could change someone's whole life.
Yeah,
and so that's why we're here. We often I think it was like, okay, this is almost impossible, but you never know.
Yeah, and that's actually like some of the best like words of wisdom I've ever received was just you never know because I mean, really, you could do one thing and it could completely change the trajectory of a case.
Or even I had a coworker here and he was like, hey, I'm starting the whole adoption thing. And I'm like, actually, I have a kid. If you guys might like be like the perfect fit. And his family actually ended up adopting 2 of my kids. Oh. And so, I'm like, my coworker, it was like the perfect fit. And you just never, you never know.
And the worst someone can say is no.
Yeah.
If you can handle no, then I mean.
Right. Well, I'm used to no.
Yeah, we both are. But I mean, it's worth a shot to ask,
Right. I would go to schools and interview old teachers and they're like, oh yeah, I remember that weird kid. I don't really want to adopt, but I have a neighbor who's all into it and I would love to maybe that could work. And I'll say, sure, like why not?
Yeah.
There's nothing to lose.
Yeah.
So is there anything else that families should know or should reach out, or is there like a website they can go to?
So the Children's Heart Gallery.
Children's Heart, is it az.org or?
No, it's just children'sheartgallery.org. And that is our website, and it shows some of the children who are available for adoption in Arizona. And families can inquire on those children. We don't provide information to families who are not licensed or certified. But that's a good starting point.
Yeah, we can point you in the right direction at least. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
If you guys, again, check out the website in the description below. And if you're thinking about fostering or adopting, older teens, that's definitely a possibility. So thanks again.